This is the Cloud Security Today podcast, where leaders learn how to get cloud security done. And now your host, Matt Chiodi.
AI security has a hype problem. One headline says agents are escaping sandboxes, and of course, they are. Another says AI will replace security teams. But underneath the noise is a more important question. Where do the actual controls belong? Today's guest is Diana Kelly, one of the clearest voices in cybersecurity and AI. She's currently the CISO at Noma Security, was then before that a CISO at Protect AI, and has held senior security leadership roles at Microsoft, IBM, Symantec, and Gartner. In this episode, Diana cuts through the mythology. We talk about why the LLM is not the security boundary, why the harness matters, and what CISOs need to do now before agentic AI turns small mistakes into machine speed consequences. If you love what you're learning and hearing on Cloud Security Today, please pause the episode right now and give us a 5-star review. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Diana, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Matt.
This is going to be fun. I love this topic. Everyone wants to talk about AI all the time now. And I thought, who better to bring on the show than Diana? So, well, you know what? I always like to dig a little bit into my guest backgrounds. And I noticed that you started as an English literature major, and that, over time you became one of the more technical voices in cybersecurity. I'm curious, what did that non-traditional path teach you that pure technologists might often miss? And what I mean by pure technologist, somebody who maybe started in computer science or physics or something like that. What do you think that non-traditional path gave you that maybe, traditional technologists miss?
So there's a little bit of background before the English major, and that's a 9-year-old kid with a physicist father, MIT physicist, he was a research professor at MIT Lincoln Labs, brought home a programmable Texas Instruments calculator. And I got incredibly fascinated with that. And I figured out how to program it, and I was having a lot of fun. Then a couple of years later, we built a computer together with a kit. And because he worked MIT Lincoln Labs, he had access to what was the DARPANET via via MIT's connection. So I was able to, in the 1970s, get on the DARPANET as a kid and play around with what was happening. And I was completely fascinated. I mean, it was the early internet. People don't, they hear DARPA and they're like, green screen. And but we had email, we had instant messaging, we had multiplayer games, dungeons. So, we kind of had it all. It was just all on an amber screen and, command line interface. But that was really where my love of technology and computers and connecting computers and stuff, that's where it came from. And I actually found a lot of vulnerability in the DARPANET way back. So it was you kind of ghost the login. And so in any case, so I really, really loved computers and had taught myself how to program, and it had quite a bit of facility with the tech side of things when I went to college. But I went to college in the 80s, and it was the early 80s. And it was still like punch cards, and it just didn't seem as much fun as what I had been doing online. So I couldn't really reconcile at that point. Maybe it was a failure of imagination on my part, but I was like, what's this for a career? I don't think I want to sit there with punch cards. I love the internet, but I'm not sure what this means career-wise. So I became an English major, which was my other love.
Okay.
And I really will contend that great program, if you look at somebody who's a really, really skilled programmer and they really know what they're doing in that language, it's almost like poetry. It's quite beautiful when you look at really, really well-written code. So I think there is some intersection. But so at that point I said, well, let me just get the degree in English. I don't know what I'm going to do when I graduate. I went out, graduated, went into editorial, but I was always the go-to computer guy. So that's actually how I got the pivot, was that it was an early love. I wasn't sure how to make it a career. And once I went into working, it became a career. But I think it always did. So the non-traditional part, though, is that I am a technologist that really appreciates the written word, knows how to write, I think, and, and also really cares about communication. So I think all of that really does inform and help technologists. And what's interesting now is that a lot of CISOs have started talking about your ability to present to the board, to communicate well, to communicate with your peers and gain consensus. These are all really critical skills for a CISO now. And, that's a lot of that as an English major, you kind of and do learn certainly the communication skills. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And you're right. I think 10 plus years ago, it was many of the CISOs that I worked with were, extremely technical. Maybe they came from a network security background, something like that. And there was that disconnect because they were almost so technical that their peers saw them as like, just very different. Like, okay, they do this thing over here. Let's relegate them to this thing over here. So I agree with you. I think that a non-traditional path, having a background like that, even though there was a little there behind the scenes I wasn't aware of, I think that's still something that's unique in that, you had this first love and then went out with, got your English literature major. And it sounds like you said you did editorial work. So how long did that last before you did the hard pivot then, like into cyber? What did that look like?
It was about 3.5 years, but at every job I was in, I worked at a magazine called Human Development, and I was the go-to IT person there, even though my job was assistant editor. And then I went to become an editorial assistant at Academic Press, which interestingly was owned by Harcourt Brace Jovanovic at the time, but they also owned SeaWorld. So we had this very weird thing where like when we answered the phone, we had to say Harcourt Brace Jovanovic, Academic Press. And at one point I said something like SeaWorld or something too, because I was editorial assistant. So I was the receptionist too. Yeah, me and my other EAs, we shared that. So that was fun. But that was for a couple of years. But I was also the go-to tech person there. And then I went to PWS Kent in Boston, and I was an assistant editor there. And that's where they kind of pivoted me into an actual technical role there initially in editorial, because this was right when software was becoming a thing. So all of that, and we were a math and science textbook publishing company. And so the stuff that we were acquiring, it was starting to come with this really rudimentary software. So it was like very cutting edge. You as the professor can actually generate questions from the textbook with this software. So to create your own quizzes and things. So this was really it was like, woohoo, it was really very new. And nobody really knew what to do about that. So I became the person who was acquiring, really the software part of it. I became the go-to person for that. And then I was training the sales reps on how to use it. And it went down to, I don't know what it was called at the time. You'd call it an SKO now. And we were having that in Florida for our company. And I was doing the training, and our parent company person was there because we were going to start tying all the 9 sub companies, textbook companies together so we could buy paper in bulk. So she was there sort of, trying to figure some stuff out, talking to people, meeting people. So it was a woman, and her boss, the CIO, was a woman, which was interesting too. But anyway, she saw me presenting this software to the editorial team, to the sales team. And she said, look, I need somebody to run the network in Boston for our 2 subs in Boston. And I think you should do it. And I was like, so, because it was actually pretty hard to work my way up in editorial in Boston at the time. And it had been like 3.5, 4 years maybe, but it felt like forever because, I'm a kid. This is my first job. So I'm like, it's my entire career. And she's like, you can really do it. And I'm like, I don't know, but I'd always been doing the IT part. And then I said, well, how much does it pay? And it was more than double what I was earning. And I was like, I will give that a shot.
So money does matter. People are like,
okay.
Yeah.
And what was surprising to me was that I had thought of editorial as being this very creative endeavor, but a lot of editorial work is you correct other people, the acquisitions part, you find the authors, you go sort of lure them in, you get them to sign with you, then with someone else. There's a lot of just, do this. It wasn't quite, I had this fantasy I was going to be Maxwell Perkins, who was famously the editor F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway, and really impactful in their writing. I had in my mind, like, I'm going to be Maxwell Perkins, right? It's not that way for most editors. So, but what was interesting was when I went over to IT, there were all these problems nobody knew how to solve. And I had to get really super creative and learn things. I mean, even at one point, to add extra memory to one version of the Mac, you had to like open it with your little butterfly tool. So it was like, I'd sit there on the floor, like opening it. And you had to snip a wire on the motherboard and then install new memory, which was probably broke some warranty. But anyway, we had to do it because we needed the memory. But, it's like stuff like that where I'm like, it was like, I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm learning so much. It's so creative. It felt more creative than editorial. So that was like really fun for me. I was like, that's why I didn't look back. The money mattered, but it was that I really felt like there's just so much to learn in this area. So that's why I stayed. And then my pivot to security was interesting. You didn't ask, should I tell you? Like, please.
I want to hear this. This is what I think most people who are, again, maybe don't start as cybersecurity majors are most curious about. Is like, how do you get there? So this is really good. Keep going.
So I'm basically somebody who didn't like me said, you're like the computer mechanic, like we just bring our computers in and you fix them. I was like, okay, thanks. But so there I was being more or less the computer mechanic. I went to another company in the Boston area where I ended up teaching myself how to actually write software for that company. It was a logistics company. I rewrote all of their front end and back end software, and also manage their network, but still not in security per se. Then I went to a startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts called DataWare Technologies, and we were getting ourselves onto the internet for the first time. I installed like their first mail gateway so that we could like actually send mail outside of our own network, which was really like huge for us. But we were excited because we could give updates to our customers via FTP. And I was so proud of what I built I'd taken them from coax to like, Cat 5 or was it maybe Cat 3 at the time. Anyway, it was like I had done all these like great things for the company and then started to tie our 9 global offices together, and they wanted to distribute their software to their customers, the updates, patches and things. And I was like, we could do this by FTP and they can just log in and they can get the software, which again, people now are like,
of course, right? Like, well, what else would you do?
Yeah, but this was all really groundbreaking at the time. So I was so proud of myself, and then did not know entirely how to protect all of my bastion hosts out on the internet. So there was a flaw, and I was using one of my hosts was NT, had a flaw in it. Some folks that were doing Wares, WAREZ.
I might know.
Do you remember Wares?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So you for anybody who doesn't, you crack the licensing key for games. And then you needed a way to distribute it. So you would basically take over somebody else's system and then dump all your wares on it and then tell all your friends on the BBS, like, hey, you can go get this free new game where there's no licensing on it. So they had found a vulnerability in my externally facing system, and I took it over. And I found this out because like the hard drive kept filling up, and I'm like, what's going on? It was Christmas Eve too, and I had sent everybody home on my team except for me and a consultant, and we just sat there.
Good boss.
From like 5:30, 6 p.m. when we saw this anomaly happening until like late, but we finally eradicated them. And I spent time thinking, what happened? I wanted to research, I wanted to understand, and I realized that you can do everything right, but if you don't secure it, then the attackers are going to get to you. And so I decided at that point, I just became convinced over that sort of like, that was like this really like eye-opening moment. I went to our head of, our CEO and to our president. And I said, look, this is, I think, the most important thing we can do. We have to secure these systems. There's nothing, nothing is going to work unless we secure the internet. So this is a top priority now. And they said, yeah, okay, sort of do whatever you have to do. But I did ask some of my mentors at the time what they thought about, because I said, I'm not going to pursue being sort of CIO direction. I think security has to get solved first. And I was told, don't do that, because we don't think about the security of the phone. It's going to be like the security of the phone, and you're going to have spent a lot of years getting a deep skill in this very niche area that's going to be solved, and you're going to you're going to future unproof your career if you do this. And I said, I get that and I respect that, but this is such a big problem and we will never get the benefit of the internet if we don't have proper security built in, then I'm going to go do that anyway. So I went off, and that was how I made that hard pivot. And I think that that's a little bit different, and different to, in addition to having a English background, the other thing I think is really sort of different about how I came to this is that I didn't go in thinking I was going to be like a super cool black hat getting the bad guys. I went into this specifically because I loved building networks and having people be able to use these networks. And I was so angry that somebody was going to take that ability away from them, that I was like, the business needs to business. And that means that all you people you bad guys need to get away. So I went into it that way, not like I'm going to hunt the bad guys, but just like, nope, business got to do what business got to do. And I think that that's a slightly different mindset from a lot of security people. And I think that also was probably pretty helpful, because again, you're hearing that so often now of, CISO needs to really understand the business and enable the business. And that's how I went into security, was just how do we enable business?
I love that. So that's a awesome kind of transition into something not that different from what you're doing today in the world of AI and what we're talking about now, right? So you're talking about, this is obviously a number of years ago there, where you had to, sounds like, convince your boss that, hey, we need to do something about security, which would have been extremely novel then. Right now it's like, well, of course we're going to secure. And obviously there's all security issues have gone away because we talk about that, right? But back then specifically, you would have been bringing up something that was absolutely new and novel, and you would have had to make the case for that. So now we are in this, what seems like this radically different time, where we're talking about autonomous systems, where we were talking before the show about the whole news that's going on last couple of weeks with OpenAI and Hugging Face, with OpenAI model, escaping this test environment. So all that to say, you are very much focused on AI and AI security right now, again, at the forefront. In our prep call, one of the things that you brought up, and I think this is something I'm starting to hear more and more about, is the concept of a harness. And you had said that, people often conflate the LLM with the harness around it. Yeah. Two questions. Like, first of all, what is a harness? And why is that distinction so important for security leaders?
Yeah. So the LLM itself is a flat file. So the AI part, the truly AI, artificial intelligence part, when you say an AI system, the AI part is the LLM. It's the large language model, and it's a file. And unless you have to run it in a system, you have to train it, there are all these things to make it sort of do its thing so you can perform inference. But I think people a lot of times misunderstand when you're interacting with Claude, or you're interacting with OpenAI or Copilot, you're interacting with software, and the software that wraps the LLM. There's some software right around it that's part of its actual runtime. There's also the harness, which can be the business logic around it. But these are software components. So when you talk to Claude, you're interfacing with software. And then that software is doing the work of taking your prompt, whole lot of other information, putting that into the context window, deciding what goes into the memory for the markdown, what's going to be in the memory, which part of the previous turns might get included, all these things, and then sends that to the LLM. The LLM performs the inference, and the output of that, the software picks that up. And then it's either instructions on how the software should act, or it's a response that you send back to the original query, or like the person on the other end. But when people think of AI, again, they often just think of all of this system as once. Why does this matter? There's a couple of reasons why it matters. The first one is for model agility. And if you have your harness set up with your business logic and what you're going to put around it, then you can swap out your models, which we're seeing more and more. I mean, we're seeing this already in the interfaces easily. We're now to the point that I think it might be getting too complex, where both, ChatGPT and Claude, it's like, which model do you want? Like, I don't know,
Yeah, pick it for me.
Do you want Sonnet? You want Haiku? Do you want to go with Fable? That's going to cost you. But, I think people are probably like, so we're all sort of feeling this model agility, but we know that we can replace models. It means that maybe if you've built a lot of stuff around OpenAI, you have more transferability to a different model, getting a cheaper model. There's that, but there's also that the security itself in the LLM, it doesn't exist in the sense that sounds very like what, but in the sense that the LLM doesn't know right from wrong. It's been trained on data and then reinforced to have certain weights going one way or another so that the kind of output, you can kind of steer it a little bit, but remember, non-deterministic, you can't always steer it the way that you want. That's how LLMs work. But what goes into that context window, whether it's trusted data or untrusted data, when it gets to the inference point at the LLM, it's not going to be able to figure out what was trusted and what was untrusted. Even if you tag it as trusted into the LLM, the way that it works, that the inference works, it still can't give you at a security deterministic control level. It's not going to be able to separate one from the other. That's why we get indirect prompt injection, not because they're, somebody's bad or it's marketable. It's just really, this is the architecture of how they work. So it's important for us to know that once something gets to the LLM itself is not a security control. It's an incredible tool, but it's not a security control. So what does that mean for us as security people? That means that our security controls have to be before it goes into the context window, before it gets to the AI itself, the LLM, not the AI system. But so the harness itself can give us controls and management around that. Choose what goes. Maybe if it sees an instruction that doesn't look like something you want to send to the LLM, it could strip it out. And when I say sees an instruction, there are a lot of ways it can do that. It could do it deterministically through regular expressions. It could do it with machine learning classifiers in front of the LLM. It could do a whole other LLM itself. There are a lot of different ways, but to do that before you get to the one that you have to the inference on, the one that you're depending on for your forward movement here. But you got a whole lot of security that can happen in the software around the LLM. And then once it's out of the LLM, you have downstream security and controls that you can have either in the harness or in the ecosystem around it to stop the LLM from doing something that maybe it shouldn't, like escape a sandbox, for example. So why does it matter? It matters because the AI itself, the LLM, doesn't have the ability to understand security context the way that and can't apply it reliably the way that we can with deterministic systems. And the harness around it, the ecosystem around it, that's where we need to put all of the security controls and decision points. And that's a huge thing for us as security architects and builders, because there's been a lot of sort of just hope, maybe I'll call it hopium, like people really the AI is getting so smart, we're not going to need security. And I have heard this from executives, and I love that. I think it's great to love technology and to think it's going to advance. But the truth is that right now, that is not how these systems work. And until there's a major technical advance, that's not going to be how it works. So the LLM isn't a security control, but the harness and the software around it is where we need to put all of our security controls.
If I hear you correctly, it sounds like a lot of this revolves around what OWASP probably a decade ago would have called sanitization of inputs. Right? Sanitizing your inputs. Does a lot of that come down? Is that kind of an oversimplification of it? But it sounds like you've got the LLM at the core and you've got the harness and all these other pieces around it. It sounds like you're saying that we shouldn't, at least at this period of time, expect security to be in the LLM itself because it's non-deterministic. But the harness is what, generically speaking, we need to be looking at to do that sanitization. Is that right?
Yeah, the harness is where we put the trust boundaries. So the context window, which is that thing right before it goes into inference, it's all of the info, not just your prompt or some agent's prompt, but previous turns, memory, any files, right? That is where you can't. That's not a security trust boundary that we can control at the level that we control the other trust boundaries. So yeah, and I think an easier way for people that are like, this seems like a lot, is that if you think about it as contamination and consequence. So contamination is if anything gets into that context window before it gets to the LLM that you don't want, And it could be malicious. It could be not malicious. Sometimes we just write, you write a bad prompt and you didn't give the LLM what it needed to give you a good answer kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways to quote contaminate, but there's contamination. So making sure that we've got what goes into the prompt as sort of as well formed and crafted as it can be and without malicious content. And then consequence is when the instructions come out of the prompt, out of the LLM inference, what gets done with those instructions, things like, does it send an email? Does it grab confidential data and then try and attempt to exfiltrate it? So contamination and consequence. And when we think, and I often will talk about it, help people understand it as you're using Claude or you're using ChatGPT. But the thing that people have to kind of, which is a great way to understand it, once you've got that in your brain, okay, now you have to put that on steroids, because in agentic, it could be 200 agents going around and around and around, like basically spinning back, content into the LLM again and again and again and again. And that's where, so it's like, it's really helpful to think of it as like you chatting with one of these, but then you have to get your brain ready to go to, this is at agentic scale. So you can spawn it's 300, 1,000 agents, if you have the compute power very, very quickly, and they can just keep rerunning a loop again and again, or, be phasing over that loop in multiple turns. So it goes really, I don't like buzzwords, but scale and machine speed are really doing very real work when people talk about it with agents, because they do mean spinning up a ton, hundreds, thousands at a time. And then that machine speed, you can just keep going back and sending, trying again and again. And that's sort of back to Hugging Face and OpenAI. I've read a lot of stuff gets very anthropomorphic. like the OpenAI agents are they're relentless. They will not stop. And it's like, well, I mean,
they're not going to stop unless they run out of tokens, right?
Yeah. Well, there's software. If you set it up to keep doing this until it's complete, it will keep doing it until it's complete. You don't think of software as relentless. You think of it as software, and that's the agents there. So, yeah. So, I think that those how to think about it.
So you've argued that AI is not magical. You said it's software, it's math, it's data, although what you just said, even though, people said that you said it's, people try to give it, human type of characteristics. It does sound pretty magical sometimes, right? When we talk about it. Now, that being said, you've also said that it's a completely different kind of software asset. So given what we've kind of talked about, like what, we kind of generically talk about AI security now, which is also a whole loaded term to use the term AI security, but how is it different from what we've called AppSec over the last few years? Or is it the same thing? Like, help us try to break that apart a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And the not magic, it's math is absolutely the case. Although I do want to also say that in 2017, when Google came out with transformers, and transformers are how we got from like the AI, I sort of started my professional career on, Watson to what we're doing now. It was thanks to transformers and the great work of engineers at Google. And a lot of people, when they were working on transformers, said this would never work. And quite frankly, mathematicians that are incredibly smart, and a lot of them will say, we're not entirely sure why it works as well. So I think that's where there's that
little bit of magic.
Slight feeling of magic. But yeah, but grounded in like, this is actually math. And how is this different from AppSec? And that goes to MLSecOps. So when we talk about an entirely new artifact, that's the LLM models. Models have not been part of the software lifecycle unless you were a machine learning engineer. It's not until the last few years have you been even thinking about models in your development lifecycle. And that is a different artifact that you can put malicious code in there in ways that's different than you put in other, because it's not traditional software. So there's a lot of, so that is something new. We do need to scan it. Early on when I was back at Protect AI, people were just downloading models off of Hugging Face and starting to, just develop AI, applications in their organization. Nobody had scanned that model for anything like malicious. So when we were like, it's a different artifact, and it's like, but we have a AV, or we have, file scanning. It's like, you need a different thing. This is different. So when we say different artifact, that's what it's about. And certainly different activity and behavior. When you look at how agentic being driven by LLM can be, it really gets into a very different state. So we have a different development life cycle, the way that you train these systems, even things like back in the day when you were looking at doing a proper training on an application or testing on an application, we were always like, never use production data. Don't ever test with production data. That's the worst thing you can do. So that's how we were trained up on traditional AppSec. Real data is how you train a machine learning model, and LLMs are just a form of a machine learning model. So even that kind of mindset of like, where it was like, never test with real data. And it's like, well, we have to test. So how you manage the data that you're doing with the training, how you do the reinforcement learning, testing the models, all of these things are actually different. And there's adjacencies and connections to AppSec, but we really did have to get new tools, new procedures, new approaches for this new kind of deployment, both for different artifact machine learning models, but also for how we test them and how we deploy them and how we build them into our good old software harnesses from before.
In the early days of cloud security, we had, the main flaw was misconfigurations. And if we looked at why that was the case, it often had to do with that cloud environments, again, in the early days, were manually built. They were one-offs. Everything was like a snowflake. And then we talked early on about shifting left, right? How do we shift security left?
Yeah.
And eventually, not that things are perfect, but eventually things, any environments that were operating with any kind of scale moved to infrastructure as code, right? And therefore we could put it through a CI/CD pipeline. We could do checks on it before the environments were created. And it really did bring down, environments became more standardized, et cetera. Where does that model of that, called that factory-like model, going through this process, where are we at today in AI security with that? Are we moving toward that kind of model, or are we just still so early and things are changing so fast? What's your opinion on that?
I love that. And, it is interesting, like with that model, because it went from the one-off to we could get secure deployment patterns and use it as code. And now we're actually got to a point where a lot of it's becoming sort of automated, the quote in AI, let the AI do it, YOLO mode, which is actually working out better than I had initially thought it would. But yeah, where are we with AI for that? I think we're still in the finding the secure deployment patterns part of the maturity. And it's in part because we all had access to these tools so quickly. And there was a lot of push from the top of, adopt these tools. They're going to save us money. They're going to differentiate us from our competitors. So everybody run out and adopt. So we've got pretty much the entire organization has adopted AI tooling in some or all of their work, whether it's, the engineers who are out there working with LangChain and they're creating everything from scratch, or we've got the CEO trying to vibe code stuff, which happens surprisingly often nowadays, it seems, to the folks at the front desk who are automating certain tasks with skills in Claude or with an agent that they've built out of from inside of ChatGPT. So there's and securing these is very different for security organizations. So that secure deployment pattern, right? You want a different secure deployment pattern for LangChain than you do for somebody who's just creating something for their own use within ChatGPT, or maybe a use for their team or something. So we've got different impact levels. We've got different models for secure deployment patterns, and we're still trying to catch up with all the different ways that people are adopting these solutions. There's also agents embedded in our SaaS now. So I think that we're still a little bit early on getting those nice repeatable deployment patterns. And I think that we will have a little bit more of a challenge, and not that there wasn't a big challenge in cloud, because it's actually, that was a huge lift for us to go from. Yeah, it took us a long time. I think, we're going to have that in AI, but also it's going to be a little bit more complicated just because we have so many different use cases and ways that people are adopting it, and that it's literally the whole company is adopting, and it's not just the cloud engineers and the engineering team. So early, But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to go where you had, and how long? I don't know. Maybe 2 years, because we're early, but we're also moving pretty quickly with AI. I don't think it's going to be a incredibly long time before we start having much more reliable deployment patterns. And also that IT can offer to the employees, look, you want to create agents? Here's our agent factory. This is the secure way to do it. Here's how to roll it out. And that I am seeing a lot more. So, I mean, maybe even a year, 2 years from now, I think we'll be in a much better state.
I agree with you. I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the complexity. Before, it was just, maybe 2 or 3 teams in enterprise that were truly interacting with any scale with cloud. And there was only at the time 1 or 2 cloud providers. It was AWS and maybe Azure, right? And Google wasn't even, in the early days, wasn't really.
I was going to say, GCP.
Maybe it was, they were always kind of the smaller player, but even at most, right? People were dealing with 3 platforms. Now, like you said, AI is built into pretty much every piece of SaaS technology. Anything that's living on your endpoint has AI involved in it. So literally the amount of complexity of trying to get all of those into some type of deployment pattern, that's just, that is a process challenge for any organization. So I agree with you. I think I love baseball analogies. I think we're probably in like first or second inning with this, but I think the rate at which we're going to move through those innings is probably going to be compressed. Whereas cloud, this was the better part of a decade to get there. I think because we do have AI that is helping to generate software, I think that's going to compress the problem down. But I agree with you as well, going back to a point you made, which is, technologists getting very easily, people outside of technology saying, well, I guess maybe we won't have a need for security because Mythos is going to solve all these problems.
Yeah.
And maybe it's self-serving, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think humans in the loop are likely going to be something we're working through for AI safety reasons for probably a very long time.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think that, I don't think that AI is an incredible way to speed human beings up, to take off some of the repetitive tasks, but it's not, AI isn't a human replacement. And and this is something that even back from my IBM Watson days, I was always saying we were always looking at how it augments. And then for some reason, there became this big movement of like, it's going to replace everybody. And crazy stuff, right? CEOs saying, I'm going to fire everybody at my company. I don't see, even if we did get technological advances and we did get to AGI, I'm just not sure that that's really the place to go with AI. I think that it's really very much humans using AI to augment, speed things up, and in some cases make things more reliable too. But yeah, not just replace us. They're not us. They don't think like us.
So you've been very active in industry as well. You're co-chairing the CSA's AARM, which is the Autonomous Action Runtime Management Working Group. That's a mouthful. First of all, tell us a little bit, like, what's the problem the group is trying to solve, and how is that different from, for example, all the other tools that organizations have today? They've got the alphabet soup of tools, DLP, EDR, AppSec controls. What problem is the group trying to solve that's not addressed today?
So it was founded by Herman Erico, he's a product manager at Vanta. And after he developed AARM, donated it to CSA because the thinking was that it's going to live and thrive more effectively in an open community. And what was, as you could even imagine as a product manager, it's like, well, people say, I'm going to magically stop your AI. So it's autonomous action. It's the runtime. Right? It's that consequence part. It's that if it's trying to email if the agent is trying to email your secrets out or exfiltrate them some other way, what's going to stop that? And a lot of vendors saying, I can stop it. And Herman just sitting back and saying, look, let's think about what that would really mean. You need, obviously, to stop it. You need to have a way to stop it. You need to have a way to allow it. So, sort of even going back to firewall, DLP stuff. With agents, you may need to defer it. So it's just take a little of time, check, and you may need to, and maybe do some other automatic check. You may also need to send it up to some higher authorization level to have a human come in. So sat down and said, if we're going to say that we can stop agents from doing stuff, what does that actually mean technically in a way that is apples to apples for everybody? So you don't just have folks saying, I can do that, I can do that. So buyers on the other end, right? Operational CISO hat on. It's like, how do I know that you're doing it? So these are the things that it would need to do to be effective. And then a standard that you can benchmark a system against to say, is it actually doing it that or not? So that's really what it serves. It serves to help the buyers, the operational side of the house, be able to understand what is it I would need a system to do to say that it's actually stopping agentic runtime misbehavior, or controlling the agentic runtime. And then how do I know that you're really able to, have you been tested against a normalized standard and benchmark? And that's what the original vision was, which was out with the original one. Why is it a working group now? Because, well, isn't it done? He was working alone for the most part. And, so, when you want something to be bigger and accepted, more globally, right, you need other voices coming in and having a conversation and saying, let's reassess and say, what is this going to look like if we want to have this be something that a whole community can embrace? And that's really what the working group is. And and I huge props to Herman, because I watch him every week on this, having this conversation, because once you open it up for a lot of people to have opinions,
Everybody
can imagine
has opinions.
it gets very complex, but you also get something that's much more durable, much more rich, and can be something that can be a standard. But really the initial impetus is, if you're going to say that you can stop agentic runtime, what does that need to look like? And how can we benchmark your offering against that?
What's I don't know if adoption's the right word, but what's been the adoption with, let's call it some of the incumbents, the Palo Altos, the CrowdStrikes, all the different players out there? Is this something that they would adopt as part of their platforms? Like, what would that look like, practically speaking, if this was massively successful?
Yeah. So there's actually a lot of larger organizations have folks in the working group. So there's interest right now. Most of the companies that have gone and tested themselves against the benchmark tend to be on the smaller side.
Okay.
But, as this gets, and Noma is one of them. I think we were the first one, actually.
Congratulations.
But as this gets more,
first.
Yeah, as it gets more highly adopted, well, because we're like, yes, this is great.
This makes sense.
This makes so much sense. Let's all test against it and say, can we hit the bar or not? But I think I think that'll be a sign of adoption and importance globally when customers start saying, look, I want to know my agentic runtime has gone against this benchmark. Did you hit that benchmark? So I think once we see all the large companies hitting the benchmark, going into the program and hitting the benchmark, I think that's when we'll know, okay, this is really done what it was designed to do, which is just to give the buyer a good understanding of, is this tool that I'm buying able to do what I need it to do?
And if someone's listening and they're like, this sounds really interesting, how do I get involved? Is it an open working group? What does that process look like?
Yeah, they can go to the CSA. It's the CSAI part of CSA. And then, you can just look up for the AARM working group. And I believe it's open for anybody who wants to come in and join and have the conversation and read more about it. And, we're constantly redoing the standard again, getting everybody's sort of opinions and insight in there so that we can get something that's really very durable and very applicable.
So I want to bring the conversation almost full circle to where we started, which was that, you've spent decades helping CISOs get a seat at the table. And I think, AI now has really, forced that conversation more than anything I've seen in the last decade. So now that, security, they have the space, they're in the room, what are maybe 2 or 3 specific things that you think CISOs need to be doing differently in order to really be adding value with this AI conversation and everything that comes along with that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to add value to your board is to help to cut through a lot of the headlines and really help them to understand what's going on, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the headlines. It's like, is this Skynet coming? Oh my gosh, this is so scary. It seems like there's some vulnerability announced every day. So number one, help them understand what's going on in the headlines and help them to really see it for what it is technically. so that they're not coming from a place of confusion or being overwhelmed or fear, because there's not a lot of plain speak about what's happening. That's the most important. The second most important thing, so just kind of calm everybody down. Big breath. It's okay. The second most important thing is to understand across your organization how people are adopting AI, why they're adopting it, and what they're doing with it. Because there's, as I said, most companies, it was like basically this sort of big megaphone from the C-suite, adopt, and so it was like, make us better. Now we're starting to see a little bit of the backup where some companies are saying, hey, stop adopting our token, spend is way too high.
We missed earnings this quarter because of our token spend, right?
Right. Yeah. Or there's a lot, I won't name names, but there's a lot of really big companies that are in the news now where they're like, yeah, we're actually hiring back all those people that we had let go because we need them. So there's a sort of, there's that. So how do they adopt? And you can help them that's going to help you in two ways. One way is you're going to understand what the business is trying to do so that for number 3, you're going to be much more set up. You're also you can't manage what you can't see, and you're going to understand how the company is trying to make money. The other really important thing of this step is that there are people using AI for things that AI is not great for. It's expensive. It's non-deterministic. It's incredible for what it's incredible for. But a great example of what I mean by not great for is that when the leak came with Claude Code and people were just shocked that Claude itself was using regular expressions to do sentiment analysis before passing the prompt into the context window. Why would you use that? And it's like, because regular expressions for sentiment analysis, they knew what words they were looking for. We as human beings, when we're angry, we go back to some real good, reliable words. It's cheap and it's really accurate. So AI is not the answer for everything. So understand what they're doing so you know how the business wants to make money, but also you can help save the business some time and effort. If you see people adopting AI for stuff it's just not cut out for, it's not the right use case. And then number 3, now, so now you're going back to the board with, this is really what's happening, and you're helping them as an advisor to understand and be less overwhelmed. 2, you understand how it's being used in the business and what it's being used for, and you can help optimize that. And then that goes to 3, which is now you come back with a plan for the board of, okay, this is how we're using it. This is how we expect to make money. This is what it's best for. This is what we need to do to make sure it's reliable, it's resilient, and it's not going to expose us in a way that we don't, that's going to put us at risk or get our data at risk. So then taking them to, now you're in that security strategy space, but you've won them over with those first 2 steps because those are business and advisory steps for them. Now take them to your plan for the business.
So if I heard you correctly, let me summarize that. So the first one is, everybody right now, doesn't matter where you are in the business, you are getting inundated with headlines around AI. It's going to take your job. It's going to hack everything, whatever it might be, right? So number 1 is, be the voice of reason, be the thought leader in terms of just understanding what this is. Again, going back to, we talked about a couple minutes ago, right? It's not magic, it's math. So maybe just explaining people just the basics. This is what it is. So getting people away from the hype, that's step 1. That'll immediately set you up as not only a thought leader, but the voice of reason in the company. That's the first thing you said. The second thing was, understand how the business is using AI and why they're trying to use it. Because obviously, if you're a thought leader kind of in the space, you're learning this, you might say hey, how you're attempting to use this, there's likely better ways to do this that are less expensive, maybe faster. So that's the second thing. And the third one then is, those first 2 steps allow you then as a security leader to propose a security strategy that's in lockstep with the business. That sounds brilliant. I mean, it sounds easy, but I know that the doing of it, the implementation of it is always where it becomes difficult as well.
Yes. Yeah. Although if you do it at least in those steps, I think that's going to set you up the most for success, because what I'm seeing a lot is, and I understand it, is that the adoption has gone sort of out of control. And so companies are trying to get to step 3 first. Our CISOs are trying to get, because they realize that you really do need those first 2 steps in order to be able to, I think, really be effective with step 3. But you're right. This is not, it's really easy to go 1, 2, 3. This is some big work that we've all got. Yeah.
But it does come back to one thing I love. One of my favorite books of all time is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
And the first habit is begin with the end in mind. That's essentially just the 3 steps that you spoke about. Is you can't begin with the end in mind unless you understand what actually AI is, how the business is using it. Then you can come up with a strategy that's tied to that, right? Beginning with the end in mind. So I love that.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Diana, you are obviously very well informed when it comes to all things cyber and AI. The question I have for you is how do you stay sharp? What does your daily, weekly routine look like?
Yeah, I do have to set aside a lot of time to read the headlines, to do additional research. I think the most important thing for anybody, certainly look at the headlines. That's one of the reasons that we're doing this live stream on Fridays, is that just trying to give people, these were the top notes of what we're going on this week. Cause I think there's so much, but do your best to stay on top of it. But then most importantly, go underneath it and really try and understand technically what's happening, because the headlines are coming fast and furious and a lot of opinions, but always ask yourself, do I understand technically what happened? And and go back to, keep doing research. All of us are still in a learning phase. We're still learning, if not exactly how transformers work at this point, we're still learning how people are applying and using them in daily work. This is something that is happening and transforming every day. So don't be afraid to just be in super learning mode right now, because all of us are. People will say, oh, I listen to you, you know so much. I don't know half of it. I don't know a quarter of it. I don't know a tenth of it. It's I'm constantly learning more and more. So I think that's the most important, is to really have a mindset of read the headlines, but actually ask yourself what's underneath those and how's that working, and probably going to need some research to help you learn. I know I need to research every week. So,
well, Diana, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for just sharing the things that you've learned with us, and for just kind of giving us a framework to think about a lot of these items. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. To find out more, please visit us at cloudsecuritytoday.com.